This is the video for section 1.2, solving quadratic equations part 1. So there are two total parts to this section, two separate videos. The first video is going to be focusing on solving by factoring. We're going to see pros and cons to the two ways we're going to discuss. Please keep in mind that these quadratic equations are going to have x squared as their biggest powered x. We're going to be talking about this more later in the semester, but they form U-shapes or parabolas if we were to graph them. And whenever we are solving a quadratic equation, what we're actually doing here is we're just simply figuring out where these parabolas, these x squared graphs, would cross the x-axis. Where are their x-intercepts at? So if you think about it, these parabolas can either open up or down. Most of the time, I know I'm horrible at drawing, but pretend that's a prettier U-shape. Most of the time, these parabolas, these U-shapes, will cross the x-axis at two spots. So that means most of the time when you're solving quadratic equations, you will have two answers. Sometimes what can happen with these quadratic equations is just the vertex. That's the point where the parabola opens at. Just the vertex and only the vertex might touch the x-axis. So when that happens, you'll only get one answer. You might get the same answer twice, but it's technically only one answer then if the answer is repeated. And then what also can happen, the third scenario that can play out here in this video and the next video, is with the quadratic equations, is it does not touch the x-axis at all, and it opens away from the x-axis. So when this happens, there's going to be no real number answers, or no answer. So just keep that in mind, that whenever we're solving quadratic equations, those are those x squared equations, you will have up to two answers each time, and that you're actually solving for x-intercepts for these parabola shapes if you were to graph them. All right, so keeping that in mind, let's look at these examples here. So for all of these parts, it wants us to solve the equation by factoring. That is going to be a two-step process every time. So step one, you want to first get your equation set equal to 0, or they call that in standard form. Get the equation in standard form. So looking at question A, we're looking at x squared equals negative 6x. So since step one is to get it in standard form, that means I need to add the 6x to move it to the opposite side of the equation. Whenever you want to move a term to the opposite side, you do the opposite operation. So I'm going to plus the 6x on each side of the equation. That'll move it to the left side. So the left side does not have like terms, so I'm just going to rewrite it left to right. So on the left side, I have x squared plus 6x. Bring down the equal sign. The right side canceled to 0. So let me write this a little bit nicer off to the side. So step one, get your equation into standard form. So then we have x squared plus 6x equals 0. Now, step two, this is where you're going to factor your equation. So as I look at my equation, I have x squared plus 6x, just two terms. It's not like a minus sign, difference of perfect squares, or anything like that. What I am noticing for this particular equation is they do have a greatest common factor other than 1. Those two terms on the left side have an x in common. So the GCF is x. So I'm going to write x parentheses. So you put your GCF in front of parentheses, and you divide that GCF out from all the terms on the left side. So when I divide x squared by that x, I get x. Bring down the plus symbol. When I do 6x divided by x, that leaves me with 6. And just bring down the equals 0 that you haven't touched yet. Once you factor the left side of the equation, now you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So that gives me x equals 0. That's the less obvious factor. It's not in parentheses. So when I say set each factor equal to 0, I mean everything being multiplied on the left side, set that equal to 0. They're going to call that the zero product property in the My Math Lab homework. Set each factor to 0. And then over here, or the other answer, x plus 6. The more obvious factor in parentheses there, set that equal to 0 as well. Once you set each factor equal to 0, solve for x. Well, this one's already done. We already have one answer of 0. Over here, let's subtract the 6 to the other side. So we have 0 minus 6 for negative 6. So we have two answers. 0 and negative 6 would be our x-intercepts if we were to graph the parabola x squared plus 6x in our graphing calculator. I'm going to go ahead and erase so I can move this answer up, but you should be getting 0 and negative 6. Now there's a good chance that the My Math Lab homework is going to want you to write your answer as a solution set. So if that happens, you're going to use those squiggly brackets right from the keyboard. So we had negative 6 and we had 0 as our two answers, and you could just simply put a comma in between them. But again, if they put solution set in the directions, that means they want those squiggly set brackets. Other times, they'll have x equals, and you would just simply type in negative 6 comma 0 into the answer box. So it's just about how does the My Math Lab want you to format that answer. Let's try another one, looking at question B. I'm going to draw a little divider here so we can see part B a little bit better. For question B, we want to solve the equation by factoring 4x squared equals 9x. The most common mistake, by the way, with questions A and B is people want to divide an x from both sides. You don't want to do that. It's okay to divide a number to the other side of an equation, but we really don't want to divide by a letter, because what happens is we can lose an answer if we divide an equation by a letter on both sides. So I resist the urge to divide by x. So instead, remember, step 1 is actually to get the equation into standard form by moving all the terms over to the left side, or moving all the terms over to be with whatever side x squared is on. So I'm going to subtract the 9x because it's currently a positive 9x. So I need to minus it to move it to the other side. So then I have 4x squared minus 9x equals, the right side cancels to 0. Let me go ahead and move this up over here. So there's step 1, standard form, 4x squared minus 9x equals 0. Step 2, let's go ahead and actually factor it like the directions said. Even though it's two terms with a minus sign, it's not quite the difference of perfect squares. It's so close. 4x squared is a perfect square of 2x. 9 is a perfect square of 3, but because of this x just by itself here attached to the 9, that's what ruins it from being the difference of perfect squares. It's actually another GCF because both terms, yet again, have an x in common. So whenever it's something other than 1, the number 1 in common, that's your GCF. So we put the x, that's a GCF, in front of parentheses. And then we divide it out, that GCF out, from the two terms. So 4x squared and 9x, I'm going to divide them by x. So 4x squared divided by x gives me 4x, Bring down the minus sign, these x's cancel, and I'm left with 9. Bring down the equal symbol and the 0. Okay, so once you factored, rewritten as a multiplication format, now you set each factor, each thing being multiplied, equal to 0. So I get x equals 0 again, or the other answer, the other factor was 4x minus 9 equals 0. So I already have one answer solved for x, 0. Let's go ahead and solve the 4x minus 9 equals 0 equation. So you leave the number glued to x for last. So I'm going to add the 9 to move that to the other side. So 4x equals 0 plus 9 for 9. Divide the 4 to the other side. 9/4 does not reduce at all. And remember, the homework prefers an improper fraction over a decimal. So even though the bigger number is on top of the fraction, that's okay. You would leave it as 9/4. So 0 and 9/4 are the two answers. Let me erase and move that up so that I have more room for the other questions here on this slide. I have such big handwriting. Here we go. So if they wanted it as a solution set, just read those directions carefully in the My Math Lab. Then you would type in those squiggly brackets 0, 9/4. You can use the answer template that'll appear below the answer box to get that fraction bar in there for the 9/4. If they have x equals beside the answer box, then you'll just simply type in 0, 9/4 as your two answers. Let's try a few more. I'm looking at question C. Draw a little divider here. So looking at question C, we have solve the equation by factoring again. 2x squared equals x plus 3. So step 1, get the equation in standard form. So subtract your x and subtract the 3. Move all terms to be on the same side of the equation as the x squared term. So let's rewrite that mess on the left side in descending order, meaning biggest exponent on x on down. So that's going to be 2x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. So there's step 1. Now I have 2x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. So now I'm on to step 2. Let's factor the trinomial on the left side. So yuck. This is unfortunately a trinomial. It's not a 1x squared, it's a 2x squared, which means I'm going to use guess and test. You're welcome to use whatever method you prefer on those trinomials. So I'm going to get my two blank parentheses ready to go, and I'll just put the equal 0, just bring it over. And I'm going to worry about the signs first. The first sign is a minus, and then I multiply the two signs together to get the other sign. So negative times negative is positive. So I have one of each sign. The goal is the middle term when it's in descending order. Negative x actually means negative 1x. So my goal here is to get back a negative 1x. When I think about the first term, 2x squared, the only multiples that give 2x squared are 2x times 1x, or x. I have no clue which goes with the minus and which goes with the plus, so I am just going to throw them in there. I'll put the 2x here and the 1x here. So now looking at 3, only 3 times 1 gives me back 3. So I'm just going to throw the 3 here and the 1 here. So this is attempt 1 to factor. I got to check it by doing the OI, a FOIL, the outer inner. So let's see, the outer terms, 2x times 3 is positive 6x. The inner terms minus 1x. 6x minus 1x is 5x. That is nowhere near our goal of negative 1x. So this answer is completely wrong. When it's completely wrong, then I'm going to switch the last pair of numbers and try again. So I'm going to switch the 1 and the 3 around. And let's see if that helps. So I'm going to put the 3 here and the 1 there. And when we check it again, outer terms, 2x times positive 1 is 2x. Inner terms, minus 3x. 2x minus 3x is negative 1x. Yay, that was my goal. So it is factored correctly. So that was the hard part, when you get a trinomial that does not have a 1x squared in front. So that factor did 2x minus 3 times x plus 1. So now I'm ready to set each factor equal to 0. So it set the 2x minus 3 equal to 0. Or the other answer, x plus 1 equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 equals 0. Leave the number glued to x for last. Leave division for last. So I'm going to add the 3. Opposite operation to get that booted. So 2x equals 0 plus 3 is obviously 3. Divide over the 2, and we get our first answer, which is 3/2. For the other answer, subtract the 1 from the x plus 1 there. 0 minus 1 for negative 1. So my two answers are 3/2 and negative 1. I'm about to erase to create some room here. 3/2 and negative 1. If they want it as a solution set, you'll use those curvy brackets from the keyboard. Negative 1, positive 3/2. Or if they just have the x equals, simply type in the answers beside it. Negative 1, comma, 3/2. And you can just use the comma from the keyboard as well. Okay, let's try another one. Solve the equation by factoring is still the directions. Now I'm looking at question D. 9x squared minus 6x equals negative 1. So step 1, let's get the equation in standard form before we can factor. So I'm going to add the 1 to boot it to the opposite side. So now I have 9x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0. Step 2, we're going to factor. It's a trinomial, yuck, again. And it is a 9x squared, not a 1x squared. So I'm going to have to use guess and test again. I'm going to get my two blank parentheses ready to go. Equals 0. And the first sign is a minus. When I multiply the two signs together, negative times positive is negative. My goal, my middle term on this one is negative 6x. My first term, 9x squared, could either be 9x times 1x, or it could be 3x times 3x. I like to pick the smaller pair of numbers to begin, so I'm going to try 3x and 3x. My last term 1 has to be 1 times 1. Yay! So if this combination does not work, I'll try the 9x and 1x pair. And if that doesn't work, I would switch the 9x and 1x around. If that doesn't work, then this is just not factorable. But I currently have 3x minus 1 times another 3x minus 1. Let me write that a little bit better. My first guess here is 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. So when I check that by doing the outer and the inner, the outer term's 3x minus 1 is negative 3x. The inner term's minus 1 times 3x is another negative 3x. Minus 3x is negative 6x. Hey, that's the middle term. Yay! So we got the right answer with the first guess. So I ended up with 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. So now we set each factor normally equal to 0, but it's the same exact factor. So you're going to have 3x minus 1 equals 0 twice, which is really going to be the same answer or one answer. Add the 1 because you leave division for last. So add the 1 to the other side. You have 3x equals 0 plus 1 for 1. Divide your 3 over, and we see our only answer here is 1/3. Let me go ahead and erase, create some room, but 1/3 is going to be the final answer. X equals 1/3. So you would just type in 1/3 if they have the x equals beside it, or if they want solution set, yet again, you would need those curvy brackets beside it. All right, so now for part E, I'm going to need a lot more room with my big old handwriting, so I'm actually going to do question part E on the next slide. So question part E wants us yet again to solve by factoring. This one's definitely a harder one. They have 6 parentheses, p squared minus 1, close the parentheses, equals 5p. Unfortunately, even though the left side is factored, it doesn't do us any good because those factors do not equal 0. They equal 5p. So we still need to, step 1, get the equation in standard form. By the way, they've used a cutesy letter P here. It doesn't matter what letter they give you. You're always solving for x-intercepts when you're solving quadratic equations. So if you wanted to change those p's to x's, you can. I think there are a couple homework questions that use like m's and n's. Really, it's all the same as the variable x. So I'm going to clean up this equation and get it into standard form, set it equal to 0. So I'm going to distribute the 6 back in. So that gives me 6 times p squared. 6 times -1 is -6. Bring down the equals and the 5p. Now I need to subtract the 5p to move it to the left side to be with the p squared. So again, first step, distribute the 6 back in, then subtract the 5p. So I know I have a mess going on the left side, but we need to write it in descending order. Biggest exponent on p on down. So I'm going to write the 6p squared first. Then I'm going to write the minus 5p. Then I'm going to write the minus 6. So notice the pattern when I keep saying descending order. I write the term with the letter squared first. Then I write the letter next. Then I write the number without the letter last. Equals this over here cancels to 0. So now it's in standard form. We have 6p squared minus 5p minus 6 equals 0. So now we're ready for step 2, which is to factor. It's another trinomial, yuck, and it's a 6p squared, not a 1p squared, so it is going to be guess and test. I'm going to get 2 sets of blank parentheses ready to go, bring down the equals 0. Let's change the color a little bit. So the first sign is a minus to bring down. When you multiply the 2 signs together, minus times minus is plus. The goal here, the middle term, is going to be the negative 5p. Negative 5p. For the first term, 6p squared, it could be 6p times 1p, or it could be 3p times 2p. I'm going to try 3p and 2p first. Whatever corresponds to the first term goes in the first spots. And now the sixth last term could be 6 times 1 or 2 times 3. I'm going to try yet again the 2 times 3 first. Throw them in the last spots. It is just a guess. So here's attempt 1. I'm going to use the OI from FOIL to see if I can get back that negative 5p in the middle term. So outer terms, 3p times 3 is 9p. Inner terms, negative 2 times 2p is negative 4p. 9p minus 4p is positive 5p. So I have the right number, 5. Yay! Just the wrong sign. I wanted a negative 5p. I got back positive 5p. It's easy to fix. I'm just going to simply change the signs. So that means that the plus symbol should have went with the first pair, so it's 3p plus 2. And the minus should have went with the last pair there, 2p minus 3. This should work, but I'm going to check it again just to be sure. So when we do the OI, check again. Now the outer terms, 3p times negative 3 is negative 9p. Inner terms, 2 times 2p is positive 4p. Negative 9p plus 4p is negative 5p. Yay, that was our goal, middle term above. So we have factored correctly. So the hard part is done. Now we're ready to set each factor equal to 0, or zero product property as the homework calls it. So the first factor, 3p plus 2, set it equal to 0. Or the second factor is 2p minus 3 to set equal to 0. Leave the number glued to the letter for last. So I'm going to subtract the 2 to the other side for this 3p plus 2. Left with 3p equals 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Divide the 3 on over, and we have our first answer, which is negative 2/3. For 2p minus 3 equals 0, add the 3. So the other side, 2p equals 0 plus 3 for 3. Divide the 2. I know that's a sad little 2, but we get 3/2. So you should have gotten negative 2/3 and positive 3/2 as your final answer. Just check as usual to see if they want a solution set with the squiggly brackets, or if they're happy with you just typing in the answers with a comma beside it. Negative 2/3, positive 3/2, final answer for this harder question.